All right, everyone. I think it's a good time to kick off and get started.
Sounds good.
Thank you, everyone, for joining today for our, I guess, bi-weekly, I'd say fortnightly, but occasionally that gets misconstrued over here in the US. It means every 2 weeks, just as a little bit of worldly English education. So our fortnightly Platform 9 Ask Us Anything session. Today, we're here to chat about KubeVirt and virtualization within Kubernetes. Today, I am joined by Mike Peterson and Pooja from Platform9. Mike is in our developer relations and does a whole world of fun blogs, videos, live streams, AMA sessions with us. And Pooja is one of our lead software engineers, heads up our virtualization practice, and has been working really closely on KubeVirt for at least the last year that I'm aware of. I know as an organization, it's something we've been tracking for the last almost 2 years. So hopefully we're able to answer questions and shed some light onto what virtualization in Kubernetes actually means, and cover the use cases about when it might make sense, why people are doing this holistically in any way, like why does KubeVirt exist type questions. And Mike is going to take us through a demo as well to help show how easy it is to get up and running for a Kubernetes cluster as well.
I'll do a deployment, and then I'll end up deploying a VM and a service, and kind of show what the YAML looks like for that, and then what you can do through the UI, and then what you can do via the command line.
Excellent. If you're new to these sessions, we like these to be open. So if you have questions, please use the Q&A or the chat. We also have a public Slack channel that you can jump into and ask questions. If you are feeling adventurous, there is a raise hand in the Zoom webinar interface. When you raise your hand, we're able to unmute you, and then you can chat with us openly. If we do unmute you, we just please ask, let's stick to one question so we can make sure we have enough time to cover questions from everyone. Obviously, if there's no other questions, we can keep chatting. And with that, I'm going to hand over to Mike and Pooja to get going. I'm not sure if Pooja and Mike want to do a quick intro of themselves, and then we can jump in and start talking about what KubeVirt is.
Let's get Pooja to introduce herself, and then I'll move into the demo.
Hi, folks. Nice to meet you all virtually. My name is Pooja, and I lead the virtualization team at Platform9. We've been looking into KubeVirt for almost like last year and a half, and happy to answer any questions you might have in today's session.
Awesome.
Thank you.
All right, so I'm gonna jump out of slides. Let's go ahead and get into our UI. All right, so we'll start out here. So I've already got a couple of nodes provisioned. These are just a bunch of virtual machines so that I can deploy stuff and test things out. So what we're going to do is go ahead and create a cluster. So I'm going to create a single master cluster, BearOS virtual machine. I'm going to call it KubeVirt. Install the latest version of Kubernetes. I'm going to go down and I'm going to enable KubeVirt, and I'm also going to deploy Metal LB so that I can use a load balancer when I deploy this. We'll put in an IP range that I can actually access that's outside of the cluster. I'm gonna hit next. I'm gonna select the controller node, so VM1, and then I'm gonna add 2 worker nodes and finish and review. And so we'll go ahead and get this deploying. And then after that, what I'll do is I'll download the kubeconfig, and I'll show off a couple of YAML files to show how you actually deploy a VM. It's just a custom resource definition in Kubernetes. You're gonna have 2 options. So you're gonna have VM or VMI, so virtual machine or virtual machine instance. As far as I know, the difference between VM and VMI is that a VM does not start once you provision it, but a VMI just automatically starts. I don't know if there's a little bit more different about them, Pooja, or that's probably about it.
Yeah, so the difference is you can have a virtual machine object created with a running flag set to true or false, and depending on that, it will either start the VM upon creation or not. VMI by default always gets into a running state. Obviously, when you start a VM, it also creates a VMI instance to reflect that it is currently running on the cluster.
Okay.
Yeah.
Awesome.
So whilst this is going through its motions, I think it's I'm going to touch on quickly what Mike covered in 3 clicks.
Yeah, sorry.
So this is our free platform. It will build Kubernetes clusters on VMs or physical machines, also Azure, AWS. If you have existing services running in Google, GKE, Azure AKS, or AWS EKS, referred to as the hyperscaler services from this point forth, we can import those as well. Obviously, we can't enable KubeVirt on those clusters. So Mike kicked off a cluster creation on a single master 2 worker node VM setup. When he enabled KubeVirt, what that means is we're going to use a Platform9 operator to go through and deploy the custom resource definitions for the KubeVirt project as an extension of Kubernetes. I don't know if Pooja wants to touch on that in any greater detail, or if someone has a cluster already running, how would they add that to a cluster that they have as well?
Sure. So in the version that we are on today, this is going to allow you to enable KubeVirt on a new cluster. And we're currently working on enabling it for an existing cluster so that you don't have to kind of redeploy the entire thing. You can just add KubeVirt and it will deploy the necessary operators, and you should be good to run VMs and pods on the same cluster going forward.
If someone's got a cluster that's not Platform9, Pooja, is it possible for them to add KubeVirt?
Yeah, I mean, it would obviously be require a few manual steps to kind of get those YAMLs and deploy the KubeVirt operator, the CDI operator as needed, but it should be doable. Yeah.
Cool. And for everything else that we're going to go through today, if someone has a cluster, they add KubeVirt to it. The steps that we go through here, I know Mike's going to go through some of the kubectl commands for doing this. It's going to be 100% the same across our Kubernetes as well as other Kubernetes clusters that have been built.
Yes. Yeah, exactly.
I'll show off. So everyone's going to see that I'm using kubectl virt, which is actually a plugin. So to get that installed, instead of using virtctl or a completely different command line, I ended up actually just installing crew. So this is a Kubernetes SIG project crew, which will let you search for and install plugins to kubectl, which makes it a little bit easier. So you can just keep using kubectl instead of having to install a bunch of different command line interfaces. And then what I'm using for virt is just the kubectl virt plugin. And what that's going to actually let me do is stuff like here. I'll show this while we're still deploying. It'll give me the kvirt option. So K is just alias to kubectl. So I can run that. That way I'm not running virtctl or anything separate. So you're going to see me run that when I actually pull up the console once the VM's launched. Interesting project, right? Like I didn't really know it existed or wasn't using it until I needed to install something for kubectl, but probably going to be something interesting moving forward to where you don't have to have multiple CLIs, like maybe like istoctl and kubectl at the same time and stuff like that.
That's a pretty cool tip. So this cluster is just on its way building, and we've got some questions coming in. So I think just a super high level 101 for KubeVirt before we start getting into these questions. Kubernetes was primarily built to run containerized applications at scale. One of the cool things about Kubernetes is it's highly extensible. And, as containerization of applications started, as people started trying to then migrate existing applications, many organizations are finding it difficult to containerize some third-party applications that they've purchased and they operate as virtual machines. Obviously, they're dependent on the vendor to containerize them. Some legacy enterprise applications, telco and banking and healthcare have plenty of those. Those applications are proving difficult to containerize, and some of them are just placed in the area where they don't want to be. They're just not going to touch them. They're just going to continue running them as VMs. what this is creating is a bimodal work effort where teams are not having to just run Kubernetes, but also run a virtualization platform. And what we're seeing in the market is, especially in telco, is there's a need to run virtual machines in the same platform as our containers. So instead of running separate virtualization tech, be it OpenStack, VMware, or some other KVM flavor, many organizations are saying, well, hey, can we just somehow run a VM inside of Kubernetes? And that's exactly what KubeVirt is doing. Open source project, so anyone can add it to their existing or new Kubernetes clusters. So with that in mind,
too, Chris.
Yep, I just wanted to make sure we had a level set for everyone. People that might just dial in and be like, what is KubeVirt?
Yeah.
It runs VMs in Kubernetes. That's the 100,000 foot view of it. And that's a little bit of the why. The first question I can see that's come in, it says, does bare metal server have nested virtualization enabled for this to work?
So you're gonna be running this in a container, and then what's interesting is that QEMU is running in the container, right? Like, so if you go to the node itself, you're not going to have QEMU running, and you're not going to be able to do like verse list or anything like that. It's all within the container itself. Now for nested virtualization, I have to ask Pooja. As long as you can run a container, I believe that's going to be fine because all of the logic's running inside of it. But maybe Pooja's got different idea.
Yeah, that's right. So KubeVirt can work with or without hardware virtualization. So if you do run it with hardware virtualization, it's obviously the recommended way for production use. But if you don't have that, then there is a way that you can enable software emulation on your cluster nodes and use it that way too. Obviously, the performance wouldn't be as great, and it's only recommended for test usage as such. But yes, KubeVirt internally does allow you to use it in both the modes.
Looks like our next one is, do you think that pure KubeVirt is ready for production and with Platform 9? Well, it's not 1.0 yet, right? But then again, a lot of the products that were being used with kubectl weren't necessarily 1.0 when people were using and testing them. And this is kind of a way to get from moving from like a VM-based setup to using all containers. Right now, it's early access for us, so it's something that you can probably test out and see how it works for you. But Pooja, what would you say for production ready? Would you consider it production ready, or kind of like this is still in like testing mode?
Right. So yeah, like you said, right, it's still not 1.0, but it is quite feature packed in that sense still. So it would kind of depend on what your use case is as well. A lot of things are already covered, and we have validated the common use cases that we have seen being an OpenStack vendor, right? Whatever we have seen customers use VMs for, you try to kind of verify feature compatibility wise what all things are covered in KubeVirt. And I would say that if 90% of your use cases are met, that's still a good start. And the main advantage here is if you're already using Kubernetes for your container workloads, it kind of makes sense to have like a common platform and not having to deal with two different infrastructures, right, for running your virtual machine workloads. And in that sense, obviously, the pace at which KubeVirt is making progress is also kind of significant. So there's a new release that comes out every 2-3 months. So they do keep on adding features there. And what we have validated so far, we haven't seen any issues with the common use cases, like I said. So it's still good for production as long as your use cases are met, I would say.
All right. So next
I was going to say, from a Platform 9 perspective, we're working closely with some development partners on using this. As it was mentioned, from our perspective, we are saying this is in an early access. If it's something that you'd like to collaborate with us on, please reach out. We're always looking for people to help improve and progress as we develop our platform. So just keep that in mind as well.
It looks like next up is it possible to deploy a different load balancer than Metal LB? Yeah, this is just deploying a load balancer in a Bare OS environment. So like virtual machines on premises, stuff like that. It's just our opinionated way of deploying something that gives you a load balancer, right? Like I guess you could deploy it. You could deploy it without one, and then you could create or set up your own after the fact. It's just that the options that we have right now are for Metal LB for that. And then if you're using a cloud provider, then that's different, right? Like this is just to kind of bridge the gap between on-premises and a cloud provider, which the cloud provider is going to give you that. So like say you deployed an Amazon cluster using our interface, you're going to have Amazon's load balancer and ingress controller stuff set up. Like you'll be able to access their load balancer in Kubernetes.
And we manage the life cycle of Metal LB. So if there's any problems, our support team will help you with it as well.
So I'm going to move along for a second, and then I'm going to move on to the next question. I'm just going to download our kubeconfig. This one expires after 24 hours. You can actually set up passwords and do a couple other things, but this is just for the demo. So I'm going to save it. And then I've actually got a little script that just moves it to my .kube/config file. All right, it looks like our cluster. So our cluster is fully deployed. We're able to actually set up a VM now if we want to. I'll go ahead and show the virtual machine interface, which right now, since it's early access, you're going to be able to do a couple of things. You're not going to be able to get into the console or any of this yet. These are features that are coming. What you can do is create a VM. You can also view the VM and delete it and stuff like that. But what we're going to do is work through the CLI. But let me go ahead and look at the next question real quick. So we got, can you give a brief intro on architecture of KubeVirt before we see the demo? Oh, so we already started the demo. Sorry about that. How does resource allocation or sharing happen? How's it different than Kata containers? So I'm not sure how it's different than Kata containers. Maybe Pooja has information on that. But let me bring up the kind of like basic diagram we have of how it's actually set up. So you've got your bare metal machine, you've got Kubernetes and KubeVirt running on top of it, and this all runs in a pod. And inside the pod, you've got QEMU running. So KVM and QEMU are running there. It's not running on the like bare metal OS itself. Like I said, you can't virtualist in there. You'd actually go into the pod to be able to do any of that. But Pooja, maybe have you looked into Kata containers or anything like that, or do you know the difference? I haven't looked into them.
Yeah, I haven't looked like very deeply into it, but at least at a high level, from what I understand, the primary difference is that with KubeVirt, it's going to run VMs inside a pod, and it's still a separate custom resource by itself, right? So a virtual machine instance object is different from your pod object. In that sense, you directly deal with VMs using that custom resource. And not all of the functionality that you have with pods is going to translate one-to-one in a VM case. As for with Kata containers, I believe it's like a lightweight virtual machine again, but it's the way it's manifested. It's like a pod, and it's treated as a first-class citizen there, right? So anything you do with pods is going to be the same as with Kata containers. And I believe configuration-wise, KubeVirt is a lot simpler to set up. There's no like dependency, and you can have features like all the VM based features, right? Like if you want to do live migration from one node to another, you want to add in a device, hot plugging support, or if you want to just scale the resource requirements of a VM, all of those are doable with KubeVirt. Beyond that, I don't have like a very deep understanding of Kata containers, but these are like the high level things that I'm aware of.
Gotcha. All right, so let's move on to the next one then. So do KH distros tend to use some standard KubeVirt OS image? What's popular, Alpine, Debian? What OS is used in KubeVirt VM? So the demos that you see are going to be like Fedora based and everything. But for a basic demo, what I did is created a container image out of a Ubuntu cloud image, right? Like, so what you're really doing is you're taking cloud images and you're expanding them into a disk somewhere. So for like the basic one, I'm just doing that as the root disk, like the main disk for the container. But what you can also do is expand those into a volume. So if you did that, you could actually decide the size of the volume and everything beforehand. If you're using just the container disk with an image like Ubuntu 2004, it's just going to be a small root disk instead of actually being large. So VDA will be small, and then you would attach like a VDB, and that would be larger, and you'd store stuff there. But I think the better way to do it, like Pooja can comment on this too, is to actually expand the like QCOW2 image into a volume, and then use that volume with this instead of actually just using like the base disk. And I'll go over the YAML to show you a little bit more after a couple more questions. But does that sound right, Pooja? Like in production, mostly you're going to be expanding the image into a disk,
right? Yeah,
like a volume.
So the only requirement from KubeVirt is basically that the image needs to be called disk and located in the /root of that image. But yeah, you can build any QCOW2 image and get it in that format to be used with KubeVirt.
Wish I would have kept my Docker file so I could show it off. I don't remember where I put it. I think I actually have another machine. Let's see. The next question is, all right. So say what OSs can be used? Any OS, right? Like any cloud image. Basically, once we get this running, which I'll show in a minute, it's just running cloud init. So it's expanded the OS into the disk that's been provided. So kind of like what you're used to with like OpenStack or AWS or something like that. And then it's running cloud init. So like if you look at the YAML file before I even deploy this, down here you've also got, so you've got the container disk, which actually has the container image that I'm using, and it'll deploy off of that. And then you've got the cloud init disk. And then what we're doing is just using cloud init, right? Like, so you've got some of the same stuff for like cloud configuration. So like I'm setting Ubuntu for the base user Ubuntu. I'm adding keys. So like putting my public key in there. I'm telling it to do a package update. So it'll do apt-get update and apt-get upgrade before it installs any packages. And then I'm listing out what packages I want, right? Like, so this is basically pretty much just like doing a virtual machine, like I said, an OpenStack or other things. Like you're able to use the same stuff. You can use the same images as long as they have access to like the same networks and stuff. Like if you're checking it into something like, I don't know, Puppet or Chef or Ansel or something like that to say deploy these for me. But so the demo I'm going to show is just a base Ubuntu install, and it's gonna set up and install QEMU guest agent. So QEMU guest agent, when you have that installed inside of there, it's going to allow KubeVirt to read information about it, like tell me what OS it is, and eventually a little bit more information. And then I'm just installing Apache 2. That way I can show that I'm able to SSH into it, and I'm able to bring up the Apache splash page. And then if we look at our service YAML, I've got two, it's an LB. So I'm using Metal LB, and I'm setting up a load balancer, and I've just set up for port 22 to map to 22 and 80 to port 80, and then select the demo VMI. So I'll deploy that in a second. Let's see what the next question is real quick. Can I run a Windows VM using KubeVirt and have a GPU exposed to this VM? So I think I'm not 100% sure on this. Most of the Windows is, so Microsoft makes some containers that will run on Linux, but then they also make containers that will run only on Windows. Is there a Windows image for this?
Yeah.
I'm not sure. Right? But
Windows containers aren't going to run on Linux.
But what you can do is, so this is, it's kind of goes back to like the OpenStack support for Windows. There's a Windows QEMU image that's I think it's cloud-based IT or something like that. And so there is like a Windows 2012 image that you might be able to expand into a disk and run, but that's going to be like a much older version of Windows. So I don't think there's really a lot of supported Windows images, even for, well, so you can run Windows, right? Like if you look at the KubeVirt, the demos, they show it, but like the way that they're doing it is the way that it doesn't seem like you want to do it. Like they're saying to like attach an ISO to it and then like install and do the walkthrough there, which is how you build images, I guess, for OpenStack and older stuff. But realistically, you would want to build it outside of that and then have like anything that running KVM, right? Like it's just KVM backing it, right? So if you get a Windows disk image built that'll run in KVM, then you should be able to run it here. Pooja, I don't know, if you have any other?
Yeah, I just posted the KubeVirt user guide link for
Gotcha.
deploying from a Windows ISO. But yes, it should be doable. It's basically just using KVM to run the virtual machine. So you can run Windows OS as well. Yeah.
Yes, you can run Windows. Okay.
But I'll throw just a little bit of knowledge into here that so the Windows OS, you may be able to do that. I haven't done that, but the containerization, Windows containers, that was introduced in 2016, but 2019, Server 2019 was kind of the first flavor where you could really take it to production.
Yeah.
And
I think I misread. Sorry, go ahead, dude.
Yeah, well, you're if I heard that correctly, you're talking about running a container in a container.
Well, I didn't get his. Here, let me redo his question for you, David. That way you can maybe help answer it. He said, "Can we run a Windows VM using KubeVirt and have a GPU exposed with pass-through?" So that was a little bit more advanced than the first thing that I read out loud.
Right.
So like that's a different thing. I'm not positive on that. Like for what pass-through is going to work within the container and the VM running on top of it.
Generally, when you put the words container and Windows together, things usually don't work correctly. I've spent a lot of time with Windows and containerization and all that, and it has not ended well, usually.
Well, so I think, Pooja, do you know about pass-through on this? Like, have you done anything with KubeVirt and pass-through running the VM? Like, to a
So I've
GPU
not
or
done it with the Windows VM, actually.
Okay.
I've tried pass-through with the Linux VM, like for SRAV and stuff, but not really with Windows.
But it did work for Linux. So like, I guess if you install the VirtIO drivers and stuff for Windows, and then you look at, I just don't know. I haven't done it with Windows either. I can't really answer that. But maybe we can get feedback on that for you in our Slack channel or something like that. If you want to join that, there's at the end I'll show how to join our public Slack, so you can ask a question in there. Maybe we can find somebody that has information on it. All right, let's move to the next one. So how do we monitor these clusters? Do we need one monitoring stack per cluster, or can it be global since it's part of the same hardware? So these are containers, right? Like, so the similar monitoring you're using for your other deployments and pods and stuff like that are going to be the same here. The difference is like, how do you monitor the VM logs and stuff like that? That might be a little bit different. Pooja, do you have any information on like how we're doing that, or what would be the best way to do that? Monitor, I guess, logs on the VM, I think is what they're really looking at.
Yeah. So basically in the cluster creation part, you would have seen that we enable monitoring for every cluster, right? So the stack will be kind of different in each. And obviously if the cluster also has KubeVirt enabled, then you'll be able to see VM level metrics populate on that as well. And once you have that installed, the Prometheus operator on the cluster, all you would need to do is whenever you're creating a new VM, you need to pass in a certain cloud config snippet to the VM creation step, so that any metrics for that VM will get reported to Prometheus.
Okay, so you're just like kind of checking it in still.
Step that you need.
Right, like you're just like checking it in. So same thing you would do like if you're trying to check it into something like Puppet or Chef or Ansible or something like that, right?
Right.
Like,
yeah.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So just treat it like any other VM. Once you got deployed, our stack is going to monitor the pods and stuff like that by default and give you information about them. And then after that, yeah, same as if you're just using a VM. All right, so let's move on to the next one. How secure are these KubeVirt based pods which have a VM installed using the CRD? So how secure is this? So I guess the security is going to be about the same security as KubeVirt, but I'm not an expert in that. I don't know, Pooja, if you have any.
Yeah, I can take that.
Okay.
So just to briefly talk about how the architecture is, right? Like on every cluster node, you have this Virt launcher, Virt handler pod that basically coordinates talking to KubeVirt API and creating a VM on that particular cluster node. So Virt handler pod is the one that's kind of responsible for doing it and talking to libvirt QEMU and getting a VM running. So it does run in a trusted environment, which means that it has access to the host. But other than that, it's not running any third-party code, right? But if you start a VM, for every VM that you launch, KubeVirt is going to create a Virt launcher pod, which is basically the container for your VM. So that the Virt launcher pod that is created per VM is still not going to have the same level of access that a Virt handler pod does. And the reason for doing that is because Virt launcher pod is going to run your actual VM, which means there could be any kind of image inside that VM, and since it's third-party code, it cannot be trusted. So there is that kind of separation of trust boundaries in terms of what a Virt handler pod has access to versus a Virt launcher pod running an individual VM does. So in that sense, it is secure, and whatever you have running inside a VM is not going to impact anything on the Virt handler on the host itself.
Awesome. All right, so the next one is right after this question, I'm gonna go ahead and run a VM. That way I can show off finally the demo and get it finished out. Got a bunch of good questions though. So what if my VM/VNF has multiple interfaces, so multiple network interfaces? I believe there's support for multiple network interfaces, but I'm not positive. So yeah, back to you, Pooja.
Yeah. So yes, you can run VMs with multiple interfaces. The way we do that is we have a network operator that you install when you install KubeVirt on a cluster. And it basically allows you to have the Multis plugin for any secondary interfaces attached to a VM. We basically support Open vSwitch networks using Multis. So you can have your primary VM interface as your default pod network on the Kubernetes cluster, and you can have as many secondary interfaces as you need with Multis and OVS plugins. Basically, we also take care of configuring OVS bridges, adding your cluster nodes physical interfaces to it using a simple host network template that you can apply to a cluster node, to a cluster, and that should take care of running any VLAN-based networks as secondary interfaces, attaching any VLAN-based networks as secondary interfaces for your VM.
All right, looks like we have, what are the best use cases for KubeVirt multi-tenant based environments, et cetera? So what are the best use cases? So I don't know if you can answer that, Pooja. I'll go ahead and get this deployment or this VM going so that we can kind of show off. It's like, what are some of the best use cases you think? Just kind of like moving legacy, or even Chris, maybe moving legacy applications from having just like one VM stack to being able to run them in Kubernetes and have like the single API to do everything, right? Like and deploy the VM that way, or like what do you think some of the better use cases are for this?
Yeah, so I'm not sure if the question is specifically for multi-tenant environments.
Okay, let me look at it again. I'll read it one more time just to make sure I got it right. So what are the best use cases for KubeVirt? Multi-tenant based environments, et cetera, or general use case? So I just want to know general use cases. Like what would you use it for?
Okay, yeah, I think the main advantage with KubeVirt is that you get a single platform to run container as well as VM workloads. For example, if you're asking about running it on the same cluster with a combination of pods and VMs, then I think it would make sense to run any workloads which share either the same kind of network interfaces on your physical host, right? Because that's not going to be different for, like if you create a host network template, that's going to be applied for any pod that's running on this host. So I think that would be one kind of way to segregate which VMs run on which KubeVirt cluster. And the use case is basically you can have any VMs ported over to KubeVirt as long as you are okay with using OVS interfaces as secondary interfaces. If you want to have disks that are imported from either a HTTP URL or a container registry, or you're using PVCs currently and you want to kind of import them over as virtual machine disks, that's like the most straightforward way of porting over. And other than that, we have also validated SRAOV support. So if you have VNF requirements and you want to create virtual functions and expose that to your VMs, you should be good to port over those kind of VMs as well to KubeVirt. There's also support for like GPU devices and stuff that we have not validated yet, but it's on our roadmap. So that should cover like a bulk of use cases in that sense.
Looks like Sean earlier had said too that regarding production use, OpenShift 4.7 seems to support it. So it must be good enough at least. Yeah, I think that they're just trying to move people over from VMs and maybe like Red Hat virtualization or even OpenStack to OpenShift, right? So they have the same UI, same interface for everything. It does seem like a lot of the development. Well, if you look at like GitHub too, a lot of the development behind this is Red Hat based too. So I think they're very interested in moving it into their product, and I think it's interesting, and it'll be pretty good for people that want to move their VM setup over and try it out. And it might work for everybody. It might not have all of the feature sets that everybody needs, but we'll give it a chance.
I think it's important to understand, like, so from a use case perspective, if an organization is asking, should we move off our current virtualization platform and just use KubeVirt because we might start building out containerized applications in the future, I would say stick with what you have. It is going to be a migration. It's not going to be a zero effort move. If you've got, maybe a 60-40 split of production applications and 40% are still virtualized, and you're not going to be containerizing those applications, then I would say that's when you start making that decision to migrate those workloads into KubeVirt and sort of test that entire stack. Obviously, disaster recovery, DR, backup are considerations that need to be looked at as well. So you have to sort of take a holistic approach at this. So at a high level, use cases, you mentioned multi-tenancy. That makes me think about, self-service VMs and stuff like that. I think it could be used for that. It would be interesting to see it in the wild from a, say a developer's use case. I need a VM. I'm just going to go log into this cloud platform and spin it up using KubeVirt. I've seen that work in the wild, so you could probably get into it for that as well. But ultimately, I think if you're just beginning the journey to containerization, I would probably stick with what you have. And if you're really late stage and you've got a lot of containerized applications and you're in Kubernetes, then this makes a lot of sense. And that's where the telco industry is at. They know that there's some applications that they're just not going to containerize, so they're just going to move them across wholesale as a virtual machine. And it's kind of the use case we see happening the most often as well.
Awesome. So what's happening right now is just like our user data is getting set up. So Cloud Init ran, the VM launched. You've probably seen this a bunch of times, watching VMs launch and looking at the logs. This is just using kubectl with the virtctl and console option. If you're on Linux, I think virtctl also has an option for like VNC setup to where you can actually view it. I'm on Apple, unfortunately. So I can't view that as easily, but once this finishes out, we already got the login prompts. Right now it's doing the scripts that I set up for it after the fact, right? Like, so it's going to install QEMU guest agent, and it's going to install Apache, and it's going to make sure that the services are started. As soon as it finishes out, I'll SSH into it, and then I'll show the Apache splash page. But then I think there's a question too about security, saying that multi-tenancy without good SE Linux or AppArmor is too much of a risk. So you're talking about within running that on the worker/host, or you're talking about running that within the VM itself, right? Like what level it means running at the like the worker level? Is that your question is kind of about?
That's what it looks like. It looks like breaking out of the VM down into the base layer. Gotcha. We do have two hands that have come up. Whilst this VM is still building, I might just see if Pradeep might want to chat quickly. But we'll just say, just running tight on time. So I'm going to open this up for you, Pradeep, and we'll spend a couple minutes. Hopefully we can answer what you wanted answered. You are muted, but you can talk if you unmute yourself.
All right, so I'll update real quick too. So I just, the VM finished getting created. I SSH into it. You can kind of see like there's not a lot of space actually set up when you just use the root disk with the image being built. So like VDA1 is just like 2 gigs. Whereas if you're expanding an image into a volume instead, you can define how large you want it to be. Now I can define like a second disk in this. Like we look at the KubeVirt demos on how they describe to do like a base setup, but then that's not, I don't know if I really want that, right? Like, because I'm just adding another disk in there too, and it's going to be a little bit larger, but I don't know if a better use case like Pooja, right, would be using the volume in case I want to like move it around. It's a little bit easier to do that instead of having it all in here. Like if I want to like detach the volume and then launch it again and attach it later. Like would that be a use case for this, kind of like a live migration type for like a OpenStack or something like that?
Sorry, so you're asking about just resizing it or actually migrating over?
So I'll say like the use case to actually use it in production wouldn't be to just use the disk like I've got, like you're expanding it into a volume, right? Like, but does that give you the benefit of being able to do like a migration and stuff like that too, since it's separate from that? Like I can detach it and then claim it again, or?
Yeah, I mean, whenever you do live migrate, it's going to internally use the libvirt QEMU migration. So it will copy over the disk from one cluster to another if it's not required. Like, I mean, it's just the definition of the disk. The actual data is still going to be on a shared storage, which is kind of a requirement for live migration.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. So basically, I mean, that's pretty much the demo. Like I SSH into it. Let me bring up the splash page. There's a splash page. So basically all I did was I used KubeVirt I install KubeVirt, and I use the custom resources for a virtual machine instance. Described it in my YAML file, deployed it, and also deployed a service in front of it. So like most of the different things you're already deploying Kubernetes. And then I'm able to get in over SSH, and I'm able to get in over 80, so I can view Apache. So you can install a bunch of other stuff in here. Like if you've already got a bunch of VMs with a bunch of custom cloud init data and user data, then you can probably copy most of that over as long as it has access to the same networks and everything. And then if we look at the UI, we'll refresh and we should be able to see the virtual machine show up. Like I said, right now it's just like a kind of like a read-only like view interface where you can like delete it and that kind of stuff. But the UI is going to eventually hopefully have console monitoring and migrate and a couple of more options. Like the console will be nice. So you can actually pull it up and log in if you don't want to add an SSH key for any reason, if you just want to have like the base user. So we've got another question. All right, so the question is, have you tried using KubeVirt with external storage? If yes, how does storage provision, what does the storage provisioning look like? Same as containers, CSI storage, can disk be attached later or only on boot? So I think that's a good question. Pooja, maybe.
Sorry, I think I missed the question.
Yeah, let me read it. So it's in the chat for Zoom too. I'm just reading out of there right now. So okay. It's have you tried using KubeVirt with external storage? So I guess they're asking like with CSI storage. So they're asking, can disks be attached later or only on boot? So I think that's part of the good question too. Like, can I only attach? I can attach stuff later, like to give it VDB, or only on boot. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah. So we have verified the Portworx CSI integration with KubeVirt. So basically, for that, you can just create a data volume out of PVCs that are part of the Portworx cluster. And once you have your CSI setup, you can just import it like any normal data volume. If you were to use HTTP URL or registry URL in the same way, you can specify this is the storage class I need from my Portworx cluster. And based on that, the data volume will internally create a PV and a PVC corresponding to that, whatever is your size requirement, storage class requirement, and it's attached to the VM, and it also imports over whatever image you want to add to that. Once that is done, you should be able to live migrate it as long as the mode that you added on the data volume spec was read-write many. You should be able to do any operation with migration. And there is support for, so there's this CDI project, the containerized data importer, which KubeVirt uses for making this seamless import of images onto VM disks. And it does allow you to hot plug a device after you have created a VM. So you should be able to attach in a secondary disk at that point.
And then looks like Matt actually gave me some information about SE Linux, and it says libvirt runs inside a regular container and can't manage SE Linux object-like types and categories. However, MCS isolation is provided by the container orchestrator, and every VM runs in its own pod with Virt Launcher. And since no two Virt Launcher pods will ever have the same categories on a given node, SE Linux isolation of VMs is guaranteed. So that's from kubevirt.io. All right, let's see. I think we got another answer to about storage. That doesn't look like a lot. All right, so let me see if there's any other questions. All right, looks like it was answered. Do we have any other questions? Anyone have anything else they want to ask? We're definitely interested in like how people would be using this, and like if you have ideas for how you would want to use it. And then right now, this is a kind of look at what the UI is going to look like after it's out of early access. So I mean, getting feedback on like what else you would expect, or if you want to see anything else in there might be helpful. I mean, pretty much like I think we're taking a lot of the inspiration from what we've done with like OpenStack, and we're adding in, just console, because some people are going to want console to be able to get in real quick, some monitoring, and then the live migration is actually going to be helpful as well. I don't know what else to add in here. Hopefully, I guess eventually maybe we'll show something like services that are attached to it, so we can get a quick view of the load balancer IP associated with it if we want to access it.
Yeah, we've got some work going on in some deeper dive dashboards. This is a question around monitoring. So I guess there's two layers that's happening once you enter the world of KubeVirt. There's monitoring of the Kubernetes cluster, and then I guess the monitoring of the VMs. The project does invest. I want to say the KubeVirt project does invest in adding endpoints for Prometheus to scrape. So that's one way. If you click on the monitoring tab, Mike, you'll see that we have monitoring that gets built in with each cluster. So this is looking at the OS, the nodes, the cluster itself, and then each of the individual pods. So this is an aggregate view across all clusters that you're running. So we do provide a centralized view of what's going on in that cluster, and any alarms that come up, you can snooze out as well. We've got some roadmap items that we're starting to work on now around monitoring and enhancing it, to start enabling customization as well as integration into your larger monitoring stack. So stay tuned for that as well.
So unfortunately, my cluster just got deployed, right? Like, so I don't have a bunch of information in here to show off.
Yeah, I mean, if there's no alarms firing, the alarms table is just going to show the the watchdog one. So,
and then this is like the Grafana overview, like that you can click and go into.
Yeah, we just want to make sure that every cluster comes up with information and details, so you can start getting into it straight away. Really helpful for people that are learning, or individual developers or operators that just want to make sure you've got a source of truth. And we are working to allow you to do things like enable remote write. So then you can just use this as like the super agent and then integrate it into your managers of managers.
Right, so it looks like we have another question too. So does KubeVirt support BSD-based operating systems seeking OpenSense, pfSense? So I believe since it's just QEMU and like KVM, right? Like, so if it's supported there and you can run it in that, then you should be fine. You just have to be able to build like a QCOW2 image or an image for it, and then expand that into a disk and run it. So if KubeVirt or not KubeVirt, sorry, but if KVM or basically KVM runs it, then I think it should be good. Unless I'm completely missing something. I think it'll virtualize that. I think the only thing that you can't virtualize in KVM is OS X very easily, right? Like I think you can hack around and get it to work, but you have to mess around with a bunch of the like different stuff that it starts up with. And then we had Sean actually gave us some information about the use case, right? So here's one use case, maybe the possibility of moving lightweight VMware Linux VM workloads to KubeVirt and replicating CSI storage to public cloud for cost-effective DRs for VM. That's pretty good. I think that the hardest thing to do is to get people to move off VMware into something like this. But if they're already using containers for pretty much everything, it's not as hard of a sell, right? Like, we'll see. I'm sure once people actually start using it and put out like white papers or studies on like what they've actually done with it and start presenting at conferences with it, it's gonna gain a lot of popularity and get a lot more contributors and probably push on to a release a little bit faster. So I guess we'll have to see what happens in the next, I don't know, like a year or so with KubeVirt. Maybe KubeCon will have some good stuff.
I always like to pay attention to the list of contributors to new releases. And you occasionally see some fairly big name companies. Apple is one of them that's been contributing to this, not in a huge way, but contribution nonetheless. They're generally a pretty private company. So you could insinuate from that in terms of adoption, there's definitely some really large enterprises out there that are looking to leverage this. As to what Apple is looking to use it for, nobody knows. But it is an indicator that they're at least testing and trying it out for some form of workload.
Awesome. I don't know if we have any, that's kind of my demo. I don't know if we have more questions or, I guess I can delete it now. So like in our UI, you can delete it. Doesn't delete this. Hold on, actually, sorry, delete it. But if I go to workloads, I could have actually seen it here. Maybe I can catch it before it goes away. So I've got running default. Yeah, there's demo VMI. So here's the pod that you can see it within our UI. And then if I actually go to like the service, it says failed next is getting deleted. If I go to the service, I can actually find the service that I deployed in front of it too. And I can actually delete that there too. And then we're actually all cleaned up, but I can also do it via the CLI. So I'll delete this. And then basically I've cleaned everything up. Oh, I don't know if I selected it. Anyways, virtual machine will go away. And that's kind of the end of the demo. Everything's cleaned up. I can go via the CLI, just make sure I got that service deleted. And that's basically it. So There are demos that they have on the KubeVirt site. I've got this demo that I just showed recorded too on our YouTube channel in case you want to walk through and go a little bit slower. We are going to upload this video as well to YouTube in case you want to like look at some of the stuff that was on here and go back and check into it, see like what was in the YAML file or like how to act, what things to select when you're walking through deployment if you want to try it out. Like you can just stand up a couple of virtual machines and go to the free tier and then just deploy this to mess around with it if you want to. And to get there, I'll show you the site, Chris.
There's a question that just came in. Is there an OVA? So high level Platform9 architecture. Platform9 is a SaaS product. So everything that you've been seeing in the UI, we run and operate for you. In terms of running a single node cluster, once you sign up, just choose VM or physical, and you'll see the option to either use a prepackaged OVA, or if you have a VM that's already running, you just download our CLI and you can install it that way. So it just adds a connectivity agent to that VM, and it will dial back, and then you can use the UI to build a single node cluster.
So I'll show that too real quick.
Yeah.
All right. So like through here, like, so if you haven't deployed anything yet and you just come in, this is what you're going to see, right? Like, so you can go to, my infrastructure, and then that'll give you the option to download the OVA. So after you create an account, you can come in, you can download the OVA if you want to make something, small and just get it running. Or like, yeah, if you have a couple of VMs already running, like I've got a couple of VMs running on a server downstairs that I'm using them for this. I just have a couple of them running, and then I install the CLI. I configure the CLI, and then I prep node. And that's the 3 steps you're going to need to do to actually check it in. And then after that, like the steps that I kind of started out the video with were just me deploying the cluster with the VMs already set up, right? Like, so as you add the VMs, they're going to show up here. And then you get the little like wizard walkthrough. If I go over here,
yeah,
a little wizard walkthrough.
That'll just build a single node cluster just to get you up and running quickly. So the product has data in it. You can build more, delete it, treat it as you please. This is a free platform. You can do whatever you want. It's fully functional as well.
Yeah. So if you notice, like we're saying, the steps are a little bit shorter here. You download it and then you just prep node instead of like installing the CLI and doing config set and all that. It's a little bit easier. All right. Do we have any other questions, or Pooja, did you want to add anything else? Anything else about KubeVirt, or anything exciting that you've done with KubeVirt since you've been working on it, or any like weird things you've run into that are interesting for people's use cases?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's just been quite plain and simple to get started with. If you have a Kubernetes cluster running, I could feel that it's very easy to set up in that sense, and even to get your like first VM working with multiple networks and stuff, you should be able to kind of do it in less than 5 minutes. So it's pretty easy to use in that sense. We will be publishing some docs with kind of user guides for getting started. That should eventually help for a new person to just get started with KubeVirt as well.
All right, and then one more thing about just about the free tier. Like if you want to try out the free tier, it's just platform9.com/sign up. And you just put your information in. It's going to send you a confirmation code. You just put that in, and then you just log into your account, and basically you start at the wizard that we were showing off a few minutes ago, and then it's basically a couple of clicks after you get your node set up to deploy KubeVirt. I would recommend, if you're doing it on virtual machines or Bear OS or something like that, just to test it out, to set up at least set up Metal LB if you want to mess around with load balancers. If you can get to the cluster and access the cluster IP stuff, then, or use a node port instead of using it, is fine. But if you're doing more than one node, I guess use Metal LB on-prem. It makes it a little bit easier, especially if you want to test out other stuff besides this, because almost everything's written assuming there's a load balancer, a load balancer service that's available. I think that was one of the biggest things that I ran into when I was doing like Minikube or something like that, was just that I didn't have the load balancer service. And every single thing that I wanted to test out had a service defined as a load balancer that I wanted to mess with. Let's see. I don't think there's any other questions. I don't know if there are any other last minute questions. We've got a couple minutes here. We're almost to the top of the hour. Or Chris, do you have anything else you want to add?
I don't know. I just want to say thank you to everyone for being so interactive this time around. It's always great to get questions, and help people, I guess, progress on their cloud native journey. So stay tuned. We run these every 2 weeks. If there's any topics you would like to see, send them over in the Q&A, hit us up on Slack or email, and we'll try to cover whatever people want to chat about. So thank you very much to everyone.
So to join Slack, just go to our site, or platform9.com, and then it's down here at the bottom. You can just join the community. Where is it? I had something blocking right here. You just click this, and then you can join the community. And then we've got people in there that are watching for some questions and can interact. And we also will post like AMA information and stuff in there if you want to join. But yeah, thanks so much for all the questions. Like it was great.
Yeah, thank you all.
And with that, we'll wrap. Enjoy the rest of the day, everyone. If it's nighttime, enjoy your evening.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.